The polish of the marble floor in the lobby of the Obsidian Grand Hotel was so high it felt like walking on water, a dark, reflective lake that swallowed the sound of Simone's rubber-soled work shoes. It was 3 in the morning, the hour when the grand structure breathed its slowest, deepest breaths, and the silence was heavy, tasting of industrial lemon cleaner and old money. Simone pushed her cart with a practiced rhythm, the wheels humming a low, steady note that had become the soundtrack of her life for the last 2 years. She was invisible here, a ghost in a gray uniform who scrubbed away the sins and spills of the city's elite, leaving nothing but pristine surfaces for them to soil again the next day. Her back ached with a dull, throbbing familiarity, a reminder of the double shifts she had pulled to cover the rising rent and her grandmother's insulin, but her eyes remained sharp, scanning the carpet for the tiniest speck of lint. It was in the high-ceilinged corridor of the executive wing, near the private elevators, that she saw it. A wallet. It wasn't the usual forgotten clutch or dropped credit card. This object sat against the baseboard like a dark anchor, absorbing the dim hallway light. Simone stopped the cart, her heart performing a sudden, traitorous leap against her ribs. She looked left, then right, checking for the sweep of the security cameras, her instincts honed by a lifetime of navigating spaces where she wasn't welcome. The hallway was empty. She crouched, her fingers brushing the object. It was heavy, crafted from leather so fine it felt like skin, cold and supple. There were no logos, no gaudy branding, just the undeniable weight of quality. She picked it up, the leather warming instantly against her palm, and stood, slipping it into the pocket of her apron before the elevator chimed in the distance. Safely inside the service closet, amidst the smell of bleach and damp mops, she opened it. Her breath hitched. It was thick with cash, crisp, $100 bills packed so tightly they barely bent. It was more money than she made in 6 months. It was enough to clear the debts, to fix the leaking roof, to breathe. Her fingers trembled as she touched the edges of the bills, the temptation rising in her throat like bile. But beneath the cash, tucked into a slit of black silk, was a single card.
It wasn't plastic.
It was matte black metal, heavy and sharp-edged. There was no name, no bank logo, just a series of gold digits embossed in the center, and a phone number on the back. No ID. No driver's license. Just the money and the metal. This wasn't a tourist's lost vacation fund. This was something else. A test? A trap? Simone felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hotel's air conditioning. Keeping this wasn't just theft. It felt like signing a death warrant. She pulled out her cracked smartphone, her thumb hovering over the dial pad. The silence in the closet felt pressurized, squeezing her lungs. She dialed the number on the back of the metal card. It rang once. A click.
No greeting.
Just a silence that listened. I found something, Simone whispered, her voice sounding small in the cramped space. A wallet. At the Obsidian. The voice that replied was low, smooth, and terrified her more than a scream would have. Location, the man said. Not a question. A command. The service corridor. North wing. 10th floor. The line went dead immediately. 20 minutes later, the air in the service corridor felt too thin. Simone stood by her cart, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to hide their shaking. She had expected a security guard, or perhaps a frantic guest running in a bathrobe. She did not expect the elevator doors to slide open and reveal a man who looked like he had been carved out of the same shadows that clung to the hotel's corners. He was tall, Korean, with hair swept back in a precise, severe style that highlighted the sharp angles of his cheekbones. He wore a suit that cost more than Simone's entire life education, the fabric absorbing the light, tailored to perfection. He didn't walk, he glided, his movements efficient and predatory. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough for her to smell the faint, clean scent of expensive cologne and cold rain. His eyes were dark, unreadable, sweeping over her uniform, her face, her hands, dissecting her in a single second. He held out a hand. No words. Simone reached into her apron and pulled out the wallet. It felt heavier now, burdened with the tension between them. She placed it in his palm. His fingers didn't brush hers. The transfer was surgical. He opened it, his eyes never dropping to the cash. He wasn't counting the money. He was checking for the card. He tapped the metal edge with his thumb, then snapped the wallet shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet hall. "You looked inside," he stated. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. His voice was a deep baritone, devoid of gratitude, wrapped in an accent that sounded educated and lethal. "I had to find a number," Simone said, keeping her chin up. She refused to look down, refused to act like she had done something wrong. There was no ID. The man, Jason, studied her. For a moment, the air crackled with a strange, dark electricity. He seemed to be weighing her soul against a set of invisible scales. "Most people would have taken the cash and thrown the card in the trash," he said softly. "The cash is untraceable. You know this." Simone swallowed the lump in her throat. "I'm not a thief. I work for a living." A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Amusement? Respect? It was gone too fast to name. He reached into his jacket pocket, not the wallet, and pulled out a thick envelope. He extended it to her. "For your time," he said. Simone hesitated. "I didn't do it for a reward. Take it," he ordered. The tone brooked no argument. It was a command from a general to a soldier. Simone took the envelope. It was heavy. "What is your name?" he asked. "Simone," she answered. "Simone," he repeated, testing the weight of the syllables. "Walk away, Simone. And forget you ever saw this." He turned and walked back to the elevator, the doors sliding shut on his straight, uncompromising back, leaving her alone with an envelope that felt like it was burning her fingers. The next 3 days passed in a blur of paranoia. Simone expected the police to knock on her door, or for the hotel manager to fire her for interacting with a VIP guest. Every time a black car slowed down near the bus stop, her muscles tensed. She hadn't opened the envelope until she was safely in her locked apartment. It contained $5,000. No note. Just the cash. It was dirty money. She knew it in her bones, but she paid the rent, she bought the insulin, and she hid the rest in a hollowed-out book under her bed. She tried to convince herself it was over, a lucky break in a hard life. But the hotel felt different now. She felt watched. The cameras in the ceiling seemed to track her with renewed interest. On the 4th night, she opened her locker in the basement changing room to find her street clothes shifted. Sitting on top of her folded jeans was a phone. It was sleek, black, brand new. No box, no charger. Just the device. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she picked it up. It was already on. There were no apps, no contacts. Just as her finger grazed the screen, it rang. The sound was a sharp, digital trill that made her jump. She stared at it, the locker room suddenly feeling like a cage. She knew who it was. She answered. "You didn't leave town," the voice said. It was him. Jason. He sounded closer now, the audio quality crystal clear. "Why would I?" Simone whispered, clutching the phone so hard her knuckles turned white. "I have a job that pays you in pennies and breaks your back," he countered smoothly. "I have a different job for you tonight." Simone looked around the empty locker room, expecting him to step out of the shadows. "I'm a janitor. I clean floors." "Exactly," he said. "You are invisible. You have keys. You go places no one looks at." The line crackled with a heavy silence. "Room 404. There is a tablet taped to the underside of the master bathroom sink. Retrieve it. Bring it to the concierge desk and leave it for Mr. V. Do not turn it on. Do not look at the screen." "I can't," Simone said, her voice shaking. "I can't steal from guests. The room is empty," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a velvet threat. "The guest is checked out. He left it behind. But if security finds it, they will log it and I will lose what is mine. You are simply returning lost property. Like the wallet. And if I say no?" Simone asked, her defiance flaring up despite the fear. "You kept the money, Simone," he said. "We have already begun." The line went dead. Simone stood frozen, the phone warm against her ear. The trap had snapped shut. He was right. She had spent the money. She was compromised. If she went to the police, what would she say? That a voice gave her 5 grand and now wanted a favor? She was a black woman in a city that didn't listen to people like her. He was a man who clearly owned the city. She had no choice. She shoved the phone into her pocket and grabbed her cleaning cart. Room 404 was on the 4th floor, a suite usually reserved for diplomats. She took the service elevator, her stomach churning with nausea. The hallway was quiet, the carpet muffling her steps. She swiped her master key card, the light turning green with a cheerful beep that sounded obscenely loud. She pushed the door open. The room was dark, smelling of stale cigar smoke and expensive scotch. It looked empty, the bed stripped, the towels on the floor. Housekeeping hadn't hit it yet. She parked the cart across the threshold to block the view and moved quickly to the bathroom. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. She dropped to her knees on the cold tile, her hands fumbling under the marble sink. Her fingers brushed against duct tape. She peeled it back, the sound of the adhesive tearing sounding like a scream in the silence. The tablet dropped into her hand. It was thin, silver, cold. She stood up, wrapping the tablet in a microfiber cloth and burying it at the bottom of her trash bag, beneath layers of used tissues and coffee cups. She made her way to the door, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might faint. As she stepped into the hallway, a security guard turned the corner. He was a new guy, young, eager. He paused, eyeing her cart. "Late night for 404?" he asked, his hand resting on his belt. Simone forced her face into a mask of exhaustion and boredom. "Guest called for a touch-up on the bathroom before checkout, but he's already gone." She lied, the words tasting like ash. "Just clearing the trash." The guard looked at the room number, then back at her.
Right.
"Carry on." He walked past. Simone didn't exhale until the elevator doors closed behind her. She went to the lobby, to the concierge desk where a night clerk was dozing. She slid the wrapped bundle across the marble counter. "Mr. V," she whispered. The clerk blinked, saw the package, and nodded once, sliding it out of sight without a word. It was done. Simone returned to the basement, her legs shaking so badly she had to sit on the bench. The black phone in her pocket buzzed once. A text message. "Competence is rare. You are learning." The following week, the atmosphere around Simone shifted. The fear didn't leave, but it hardened into a cold, sharp alertness. She found herself watching the guests, noticing the way money moved in the hotel, the subtle nods between men in suits, the heavy briefcases that never seemed to be opened. She was no longer just cleaning the stage. She was watching the play from the wings. She hadn't heard from Jae-sun since the text. The silence was worse than the commands. It felt like the eye of a storm. Then, on a Tuesday, as she was clocking out, a black sedan pulled up to the employee exit. The window rolled down. It wasn't Jae-sun. It was a driver, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk.
"Get in," he said.
It wasn't a request. Simone looked at the bus stop down the street, then at the car. The choice was an illusion. She opened the back door and slid onto the leather seat. The car smelled of the same rain and cologne scent she remembered from the hallway. They drove in silence, not away from the city, but deeper into it, toward the skyline that pierced the clouds. The car stopped at the private entrance of a residential skyscraper, a tower of glass and steel that looked down on the rest of the world. The driver escorted her to a private elevator that had no buttons, only a key scanner. The ride up was fast, the pressure popping her ears. The doors opened directly into a penthouse that was larger than the entire floor of the hotel she worked in. The walls were glass, revealing the city as a grid of golden lights below. Jae-sun stood by the window, a drink in his hand. He had shed the suit jacket, his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were corded with muscle. He didn't turn around as she entered. "The view is better from here," he said, his voice reflecting off the glass. "You can see the patterns." Simone stood near the elevator, refusing to step further into his world. "I did what you asked," she said, her voice steady. "I'm done." Jae-sun turned then, the movement slow and deliberate. He looked at her with a terrifying intensity. "You are done when the contract is fulfilled," he said. "And we have only just drafted the terms." He walked toward her, stopping just outside her personal space. You have a debt, Simone. Not to the bank, but to your potential. You are wasting your life scrubbing floors for people who don't see you. I see you. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes locking onto hers. I have a position for you. It pays 10 times your salary. It requires discretion, loyalty, and nerve. He placed the glass on a nearby table. But once you accept, there is no going back to the mop. You become part of the structure. My structure. The city lights flickered behind him, a vast, glittering web. Simone looked at his hand, then at his face. The exit was behind her, but the door was already closing. I'm not a soldier, Simone said, her voice steady despite the vertigo induced by the sheer drop visible through the glass walls of the penthouse. I don't know how to shoot a gun, and I don't know how to launder money. I clean. That's what I do. Jae-sun watched her, his expression unyielding, the amber liquid in his glass catching the city lights. Precisely, he replied, moving to his desk, a slab of black obsidian that seemed to float in the center of the room. My world is filled with soldiers. Soldiers are blunt instruments. They break things. I have enough breakers. I need someone who knows how to maintain order. Someone who notices when a single item is out of place. He placed a folder on the desk. You found a black card in a dark hallway. You found a tablet taped under a sink. You see the invisible friction that slows down the machine. He tapped the folder. This is not a request for you to pull a trigger. It is a request for you to manage my life, my schedule, my safe houses, the logistics of my interactions. You will be the filter between me and the chaos. Simone walked to the desk, her fingers hovering over the leather file. The offer was a trap, she knew that. It was a golden cage. But the alternative was the gray uniform, the aching back, the invisible poverty. She opened the folder. It contained a contract, a bank account number with a balance that made her breath hitch, and a set of keys. If I sign this, she asked, looking up at him, do I own my life, or do you? Jae-sun's eyes softened, just a fraction, a microscopic crack in the ice. You own your future, he said. But your present belongs to the firm. To me. Simone picked up the heavy fountain pen. The ink was black and permanent. She signed. The scratch of the nib was the sound of her old life dying. Good, Jae-sun said, taking the folder back without checking the signature. Go to the guest suite. Your uniform is in the trash. Tomorrow we begin. The transition was not a gentle slope, it was a cliff dive. Within a month, Simone had become the ghost in the machine of Jae-sun's empire. She no longer wore the gray polyester of the hotel. She wore sharp, tailored blazers and silk blouses that cost more than her grandmother's car, clothes that acted as armor against the world she now inhabited. Her official title was executive assistant, a bland shield for a role that required her to be the gatekeeper of a criminal kingdom. She managed the flow of information. She organized the erratic, dangerous schedules of Jae-sun's lieutenants. She cleaned up the digital trails and the physical messes. One rainy Tuesday, she stood in the corner of a private room in an exclusive members-only club, her posture perfect, her face a mask of professional disinterest. Jae-sun sat at the center table, opposite a man from the triad who smelled of stale tobacco and desperation. The air was thick with the threat of violence. Simone watched the triad boss's hands. They were twitching. She noticed his eyes flicking repeatedly to the service door behind the bar. It was a pattern she recognized from the hotel. Guilty guests always looked at the exits or the places they hid things. She stepped forward, her heels clicking on the hardwood, breaking the heavy silence. She poured water into Jae-sun's glass, leaning in close. The service door is unlatched, she whispered, her voice barely a breath against his ear. And the man to your left is sweating through his shirt in a cold room. She pulled back, her face returning to neutrality. Jae-sun didn't flinch. He didn't look at the door. He simply set his glass down. We are done here, he announced abruptly, standing up. His enforcers, sensing the shift, moved instantly. As they exited the club, the service door burst open, but they were already in the corridor, the heavy steel security door slamming shut behind them, locking the ambushers inside. In the back of the armored sedan, the silence was absolute. Jae-sun looked at her, the streetlights casting rhythmic shadows across his face. "You have good eyes," he murmured. It was the most praise he had given her in weeks. Simone looked out the window, her heart rate finally slowing. "I just look for the dirt," she said. "Dirt always shows itself if you wait long enough." Winter descended on the city, turning the streets into canyons of gray slush and biting wind. The bond between Simone and Jae-sun had tightened into a knot of silent dependency. She lived in the penthouse now, in a separate wing, but their lives had bled into one another. She knew how he took his coffee, black, specific temperature. She knew which lieutenants he trusted, none of them, and she knew that the silence he carried was a weight that was slowly crushing him. He, in turn, watched her with a possessive intensity. He brought her gifts that were not flowers or chocolates, but tools, a secure encrypted phone, a jagged piece of jade from his home village, a lesson in how to spot a tail. One evening, after a grueling negotiation that had lasted 12 hours, they sat in the living room of the penthouse. The fire was lit, casting long, dancing shadows. Jae-sun had loosened his tie, the top button of his shirt undone, exposing the hollow of his throat. He looked exhausted, human in a way he never allowed the world to see. "Why do you stay?" he asked suddenly, staring into the flames. "You have enough money now. You could vanish. Start over." Simone looked up from her tablet, where she was reconciling the accounts of a shell company. "And go where?" she asked. "Back to being invisible? Back to scrubbing floors for people who look through me?" She stood up and walked to the window, the city sprawling below them like a board game they were winning. "Here I matter. Here, when I speak, things happen." She turned to face him. "And you need me." Jae-sun stood up and crossed the room, stopping inches from her. The air between them grew thin, charged with the static of unsaid things. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, a touch that was hesitant, almost reverent. "I do," he confessed, the words rough. "That is the danger. A king cannot need a pawn. It makes him weak." "I'm not a pawn," Simone whispered, leaning into his touch, her eyes holding his. "I'm the queen who protects the king." His hand tightened slightly on her face, his thumb brushing her lower lip. "Then God help anyone who tries to take you from the board," he swore. He didn't kiss her. He wasn't a man who gave into impulses easily, but the promise in his eyes was more intimate than any physical act. The test of that promise came 3 days later. It wasn't a rival gang or a police raid. It was a betrayal from within. The inner circle had a leak, and the rot had spread fast. Simone was in the archives room of the penthouse, digitizing old ledgers, when the security system blinked red. Not an alarm, a bypass. Someone had disabled the perimeter sensors from the inside. She froze, the scanner light humming in the quiet room. She checked the monitor. The elevator was moving up, overriding the lockdown. Jae-sun was in the study, unaware. She didn't scream. She didn't hide. She grabbed the heavy brass letter opener from the desk and ran. She reached the study just as the elevator doors in the hallway pinged open. 3 men stepped out, wearing the uniforms of Jae-sun's own security detail, weapons drawn. They weren't here to guard. They were here to execute. Simone slammed her hand onto the manual override panel on the wall, a hard red button that Jae-sun had shown her once, jokingly calling it the doomsday switch. Steel shutters crashed down over the study door and the windows, sealing Jae-sun inside the safe room, but leaving Simone in the hallway with the gunman. She turned and ran for the service stairs, the sound of suppressed gunfire spitting behind her, bullets chipping the marble walls. She scrambled down the stairs, her breath tearing at her throat, fumbling for her phone.
She didn't call the police.
She dialed the specific code Jae-sun had given her for the cleaners, his personal, off-the-books enforcement squad. Penthouse. Betrayal. The code black. She gasped into the receiver. She hid in the maintenance closet on the 40th floor, listening to the heavy boots of the traders hunting her. They knew she was the loose end. They knew she was the one who controlled the access. Minutes stretched into hours. Then, a different sound, the rhythmic, muffled thuds of professional violence. Silence followed. The door to her closet was wrenched open. It wasn't a traitor. It was Jason. He was disheveled, his shirt torn, a smear of blood on his cheek that wasn't his. He looked wild, terrified. When he saw her, he didn't speak. He pulled her out and crushed her against him, his arms shaking. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling sharply. I thought his voice broke. I thought I had lost the light. The aftermath was a brutal, efficient purge. The traitors were removed, the organization tightened, the ranks scrubbed clean. But the dynamic in the penthouse had shifted irrevocably. Simone was no longer just an employee or a confidant. She was the survivor who had saved the crown. 2 weeks after the attack, Jason took her to the roof of the building. The wind was fierce, whipping her coat around her legs, but the sky was clear, a dome of infinite black. He stood by the railing, looking out at the city that feared him. He turned to her, his face serious, stripped of all masks. In my culture, in my world, dead as a chain, he said, his voice fighting the wind. I owe you my life. I owe you my empire. There is no payment large enough to settle this ledger. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a ring box. He pulled out a signet ring, heavy gold, engraved with the crest of his family, a tiger in the grass. It was a symbol of absolute authority, worn only by the head of the syndicate. I cannot pay you, he continued. I can only bind you. I want you to take this. Not as a gift, but as a share. Simone looked at the ring, then at him. What are you asking, Jason? I am asking you to stop being the one who cleans the mess, he said, stepping closer, taking her hand. I am asking you to be the one who rules the house. I want you to marry me. The wind seemed to die down, leaving them in a vacuum of intensity. This is not a romance, he said, his eyes burning into hers. This is a merger. A fortress. You and I. No one else enters. No one else leaves. We will be the only 2 people in the world who know the truth. Simone took the ring. It was warm from his skin. She didn't hesitate. She slid it onto her finger. It was too big, but she curled her hand into a fist, holding it tight. It's a deal, she said. Jason leaned down then, and this time, he kissed her. It was cold and desperate, and tasted of iron and rain. It was a seal on a contract written in blood. The wedding was not held in a church. It took place in the main hall of the penthouse at midnight. There were no guests, only the lawyer and the highest-ranking lieutenant to serve as witnesses. Simone wore a dress of midnight blue velvet, high-necked and long-sleeved, elegant and severe. Jason wore a black tuxedo, the signet ring now back on his finger, matched by a simple gold band on hers. The room was dim, lit only by the city lights below and 100 candles that flickered in the draft. The vows were not about sickness and health. They were spoken in Korean and English, promises of silence, of loyalty, of a shared shadow. I vow to be your shield, Jason said, his voice low and resonant. To keep the world from your door.
To kill for you.
To live for you. I vow to be your eyes, Simone replied, her voice steady, echoing in the vast room. To see what is hidden. To keep your house. To hold your secrets. When the lawyer declared them united, there was no applause. There was only the heavy, significant silence of a vault door closing. Jason took her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. My wife, he whispered, testing the word, finding it heavy and good. My partner. Simone looked past him, at the reflection in the glass. She saw the girl who used to scrub floors, the ghost in the gray uniform, fading away. In her place stood a woman in velvet and gold, holding the hand of a monster who adored her. She squeezed his hand back, a sharp, possessive grip. The floor is clean, Jason, she whispered, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Now, let's own the building.